Okay, welcome everybody to the Pre-Kindergarten Entry and Exit Profile Alternate Assessment WebEx training today. So if you'll notice, we do have a couple interpreters with us today. We should have a few participants from USDB with us. So can everybody hear me just fine out there?
Tracy?
Loud and clear, yes and yes. Okay, can you guys, even if you don't need the interpreter, can you guys see our gals signing clearly? Everyone's saying yes. Okay, here we go. Let's get started. So an introduction, my name is Tracy Gooley, and I am the Special Education Assessment Specialist up at the Utah State Board of Education. And so I oversee any of our accommodation stuff for all of our statewide assessments, as well as alternate assessments for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And this is not advancing. Some technical, there we go. Okay, so our agenda today, so what we're going to go over, we've got 30 minutes to see if we can get this training done as quick as possible. The regular PEEP training starts at 1. So we're going to go over the purpose of the PEEP really quickly. We're going to look at qualifications, who out there should be taking our alternate. We'll take a quick look at the assessment and scoring, and then our data entry procedures. So the other thing is this rubric assessment and scoring guide should hopefully be available on our webpage later today, if not tomorrow. At the end, you'll see an email address for me, so feel free if you want to shoot me an email either during this or the training or after the training, and I can forward on these rubrics to you guys. So we've just kind of been scrambling to get everything put together for this training. So shoot me that email, and I will go ahead in the chat box, enter my email address as well for you so we can get these rubrics off to you. Okay. All right, so the purpose of the regular PEEP. So I think it's important to understand that piece before we get into why we do an alternate PEEP. So the initiative came through legislation that we would basically be doing a program monitoring of our preschool funding programs in the state. So really the idea was to understand the influence and impact of the pre-kindergarten in both short-term and long-term programs, and then being able to provide that data-informed decision-making around these two initiatives. So that's where the PEEP came from, the Pre-K Entry and Exit Profile, which brings us to our purpose of an alternate assessment. So underneath IDEA, right, which is our federal regulation that outlines all of our disability requirements, we have this section in there that talks about how a state must ensure that all children with disabilities are included in all general and state district-wide assessment programs. So with that comes the initiative that even if a student needs an alternate assessment that can't access the regular assessment, that has to be provided. So that's where alternates come in. So really, what is our purpose at the state for your purpose of teachers of the alternate assessment? Because one, we know that these students are already behind. We know that these students are already receiving special programming. So really when we look at this, we feel like the PEEP alternate is a piece of data that can help guide IEP team decisions and drive instructional decisions for our students with significant cognitive disabilities. And then it also is a good chance for teachers to have a better understanding of where students are within our standards. So who takes an alternate assessment? So I think it's really important to be clear here. So the PEEP, we will have some public schools and charter schools, school districts and charter schools that may be administering our PEEP assessment and PEEP alternate, but we also have private as well. So PEEP alternate truly is for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So what this means is that an IEP team is So I'm reading the chat, just making sure nobody has any questions. It means that the IEP team has determined that this student has a significant impact in their intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. The student requires extensive, repeated, direct, individualized instruction and substantial supports to achieve measurable gains in the curriculum, right? And most importantly, it's determined by an IEP team. So a teacher, a parent, or a principal, right, unilaterally could not determine that a student participates in an alternate assessment. It's a team decision. And the tricky thing that comes into place with our PEEP assessment is the standards that students are receiving instruction in. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. So things that do not qualify a student to take an alternate assessment, whether it's the preschool assessment, kindergarten, or any of our other assessments, is it can't be based upon special education services, where their class or location is, right, or a student's placement. It can't be based upon this student has poor attendance in school, so they really need an alternate path because they're not here enough to get benefit out of the general curriculum or assessments. And it can't be simply just because, well, the student has a disability and they're just going to really struggle and probably perform low anyway, so we're going to give them an alternate. So that is not the intent of an alternate assessment. So a team really has to dig into that significant cognitive piece and really make that determination that a student has that. One of the other things with the PEEP is typically alternate assessments for students, they're receiving instruction in alternate standards. However, for our preschool assessment, we don't have alternate standards. So all students, regardless of their disability, are receiving instruction in the same early childhood standards. So as we get into the development of the PEEP, we'll talk a little bit more how that looks. Our testing window for a PEEP alternate is the exact same testing window as our regular PEEP. So all students will be taking the PEEP assessment 4 weeks prior to the first day of pre-kindergarten through the first 4 weeks of school. So really, though, it needs to be administered before September 2nd. And then data entry goes into the data gateway by September 30th. And you'll enter alternate data in the same place that you would enter regular PEEP data. So if you're not quite sure if you have access to Data Gateway or what that looks like, here's the link here, and you'll want to work through your assessment directors or whoever oversees the assessment stuff in your school or district, and they'll be the ones that will help get you into Data Gateway. All right, so let's look at our PEEP alternate design. So we talked earlier about how we don't have alternate standards for students with significant cognitive disabilities. That doesn't come into play until kindergarten. So when we started looking at the PEEP, right, because we didn't have alternate standards, the question came about, do we really even need an alternate assessment for those kiddos? Because if you think about it, our preschool standards really are basic level kind of foundational skills anyway. So what we did is the preschool special ed specialist and I took the regular PEEP and went out to a school that had some students with significant cognitive disabilities and attempted to administer the assessment. We quickly did discover that those kiddos definitely needed something that had a little bit of reduction in the complexity and breadth of what was being asked. So when we looked at aligning and creating our alternate, we really did align it. It is directly aligned to the PEEP regular questions and the regular early childhood standards. So in our PEEP alternate, we assess the same categories that is done in the PEEP entry. So literacy, numeracy, and social and emotional there. Let's see, I have a chat here. Our preschool does not start until September 10th. Let's see. I don't know if Liz is online. I do see Whitney Barlow here. I don't know if Whitney, you can help answer that, or if you can grab Liz to maybe help answer that. Our school doesn't start until August 26th, therefore we won't finish testing by September 2nd. So I'm not quite sure what Liz Williams' direction will be on that. So hang tight and we'll see if we can get her to answer that. Same issue at South San Pete. Okay, let me check on that September 2nd. It seems like there's some, and maybe I misunderstood something. So we'll get clarification for you guys on that. Okay, so here's our 3 scoring categories that happen. So literacy, numeracy, and social and emotional are the areas that we will administer. So the design of the PEEP Alternate Assessment rubric, so I don't know if any of you have seen the KEEP assessment and the KEEP Alternate Assessment, but it's designed the same. So it really is a rubric-styled assessment in the areas of literacy and numeracy. They are meant to be completed for each student by the teacher. It really is designed to be based upon performance. It can align to IEP goals, and really it's meant to be covering the skills and assessing the skills that are taught every day in the classroom during instruction. And the design of the assessment is not necessarily meant to be administered, like where you come in and sit down and do one-on-one administration with a student. It really is meant to be sort of an observational type task. However, knowing that you have this entry piece that happens right at the beginning of the school year, you may find that you do have to sit down and kind of do a little bit more sort of a one-on-one, or at least set up in your classroom tasks to observe the student attempting the various tasks. And then each student will use the same rubric for entry and exit. My recommendation is when you are marking on those rubrics, use different colored pens to code your entry and exit. You can also take this rubric and do like a mid-year testing for your own self if you wanted for that progress monitoring piece. Okay, so here's what our rubrics look like. So this is an example of our page of our rubric. So if you look at it, right, we've got the pre-K up here under literacy, and then you'll notice on the bottom you have that entry and exit date, and that's where that color coding can come in with your pens. But the way our rubrics are set up, so on the left-hand side here, you'll see the area or domain that's being tested. So we've got vocabulary, and then we will tell you which question this aligns with in the regular PEEP, because that's what we did when we looked at this assessment, knowing that we didn't have different standards. We went question by question through the regular PEEP and just looked at that reduction. So you will find that there are some questions in the regular PEEP that we may not have an alternate question for, because we felt like that reducing that complexity or looking at that skill really maybe was not the most applicable for this population. So that's the first thing you find on the rubric on the side there, is that alignment. And then as you go about, the next column you have is your early childhood core standards. So this is where we're aligned to. So you can see here, the first standard is use common prepositions, for example, to, from, in, out, on, off, for, of, by, with. So that's our alignment there. Then as you move about, we have what are called our performance levels. So now we say, okay, aligned to this question in our standard, here's how our students are going to score in these performance levels. So you'll notice on each rubric page that you will always have that not emerging skill level. And you'll always see that its student is not yet demonstrating skills at an emergent level, and that's okay. But if you look at your point scoring, you'll notice that you still gain 1 point for even being at that not emerging level. And I was just noticing, Liz chimed in and said, clarify the window is 4 weeks before and 4 weeks after the first day of preschool. So don't worry about that September 2nd. I don't know where I got that date. Somewhere I heard something that made me think that. So just ignore that. Data should be entered by September 30th. So does that help clarify for you guys? My apologies for that. Okay, so then from there you go from not emerging over to emerging. So you'll get 2 points at an emerging level, right? And you're outlining your tasks there. And then you move over to approaching target. You get 3 points in an approaching target and then at target. So the idea behind it is as you move along these performance levels, if your student is performing skills at the target level, you should probably think about the general PEEP, right? If they're all in that target or you feel like they're a little bit above that, your student might be able to access the general PEEP even if they have a significant cognitive disability. Okay, so how do we go about scoring? So how to score at a performance level. So in order to move from not yet emerging to emerging or approaching target, the student needs to be able to complete each skill within that performance level to move to the next one. And it has to be determined to mastery. So this is where we give you some flexibility as teachers with students with significant cognitive disabilities. Typically in our world of special education, mastery is either 80% correct or 80% independent is kind of a general guideline. So you as a teacher do have a little bit of flexibility in what that looks like for your students. So you determine that mastery piece. Okay, so also with scoring. So what are things that you can use in determining scoring for a student in a profile? And this may be something that you use more on the exit, right? As you've had the student all year, you're taking, progress monitoring throughout the week or monthly, and you get to know students a little bit better. You can use anecdotal notes to help determine that mastery and guidance on that. Work samples, videos, observations, right? You're observing the student in your small group or whole group class and know that, typically our student, counts to 5 or counts to 3, 3 out of 4 times when asked. So there is a variety of ways in which each indicator could be assessed for a student. So for example, a student may identify details in a story by selecting an item on an output message device, while another student may select from a field of 5 different answers. So the biggest thing within the standardization of this is remember, however you assess that specific task or indicator for a student at the entry, you want to assess it the same at the exit because we are looking at that growth piece. So just don't change up the way you're administering the task for each student on that individual basis. Okay, so let's look at literacy. Oh, you're good. You can keep going. Okay. Except for you're a little bit taller. There we go. Okay, is that still good? Can everybody see okay? Okay, so literacy. Let's break these down really quick. So here we go, alignment to question 1. So if I am going about and I'm looking at my rubric and I say, okay, my student is engaging, we'll give attention towards a picture, right? When we're presented with a picture of an object or a story where the student will give attention to it. But my student is not quite yet at the point where they're indicating, right, a correct picture when requested. And we have very specific, we're looking at on or under, in, on, or under here. So we're looking for those very specific common preposition words within this. So if my student is not quite here yet, they're at emerging. So we're going to give them 2 points. All right, moving on to the next question then. My student, let's see, so we'll open a book. Proper orientation is not required. So if you hand them a book, or maybe during circle time or free time, right, typically your student is interacting. They can open the book or they don't open the book. So for this case, my student is not quite there where we're opening and playing with books yet. So my student is still in that not emerging point. We haven't mastered that skill. Then I move on to the next one. And for the sake of this one with my kiddo, my student will distinguish between objects and print, right? But can't quite distinguish between letters and pictures of objects yet. So that puts my student in that emerging. And for the next one, we've got aligned to question number 4. Student will distinguish between letters and pictures. We're not quite there yet, so we're still in that not yet emerging. So that's my plans for entry. Another thing is so if, let's say, for example, my student was able to distinguish between letters and pictures, right, could repeat a letter pair name with teacher if I look at my approaching target skill sets, but my student still can't match at least 3 letter pairs from their name, my student would then score in emerging, right? Because they have to be able to do both skill sets in each performance level column in order to be considered mastery at that level. So then moving forward to this one for writing strokes. So my student, they can use a writing utensil and maybe scribble on the paper they're making marks. And my student will imitate writing movements, up, down, circle, diagonal, using a writing utensil. They can do that, but we're not yet at the point where we're really tracing shapes. So for this kiddo, we're at approaching target. The next one aligned to question number 6. So my student was able to repeat the name of pictures that correspond to a spoken single syllable word: dog, house, cup, cat, fish. And they were also able to identify pictures, right, that correspond to dog, house, cup, cat, and fish. But we're not quite at a point where we will identify the pictures with 2-syllable words. So for this sake, my kiddo is at approaching target here. And then question 8. We can turn towards the speaker when spoken to, right? We're giving that attention, but the student uses at least one word related to a presented familiar object. We're not there yet. And my student also can't use at least one word related to a familiar person. So we're still in that emerging level. Okay, then I get through. So here I am at my scoring rubric, right? So I've gone through all of my rubrics. I've added them up, right? Depending on whether my student fell at an emerging, right, or approaching target, they got their points. So we add up the points here for vocabulary, directionality, letters of concept, and we got a total of 14 out of 28 possible points. So that's where my student fell on that. Now, we don't know what that means yet. Would that be considered proficient, not proficient? Is that on target, not target? We don't know. We will be doing standard setting in the fall alongside the regular KEEP to look at where students across the state typically fell in that entry, and then we'll be setting scores, proficiency scores at that point. Okay, so any questions around literacy, what that looks like, how you're scoring literacy? Hopefully seems fairly understandable. Got a no from Penny. Okay, so numeracy. We're going to zip through this really quick. I got 5 minutes to wrap this up. Numeracy rubric is the same, right? You've got your shapes or your standards and your question aligned to that. You've got your not yet emerging, and you just determine, can my student do these skills or not do these skills? So as I ran through my rubric, right here we had emerging, so we got 2 points there. Alignment to question number 10, my student is not quite at those emerging skills, right? We're still working on repeating teacher counting 1 to 3. But this one, my student is able to match numbers 3 to 4 and will repeat teacher verbalizing the numbers 3 to 4 during matching. The next one, 1-to-1 correspondence, right? Student can place the correct number of object counters, right, on preset dots and repeat the teacher, but that's as far as we got on here, so we're at emerging. The next one for this was duplicating and extending patterns. My student's not able to do any of those skill sets. If you notice here over at target under 4 points, we kind of gave you an example of what that colored printout pattern map could look like. So we're still working on. So should this alternate assessment be given to students after school has started in the classroom so we can observe them during class? So that is a great question, Alicia. It's totally up to you. So you determine, you know, typically a lot of times we've had these kids for a couple years. So you're only doing this with your preschoolers that are going into kindergarten next year. So, and how do you get the materials? You're going to send me an email and I will email you the materials, and hopefully they will be posted on the website either by the end of today or tomorrow. But you'll shoot me an email and I can get these materials emailed off to you. Okay, so the next one, same thing. You figure out what skill sets a student can do, can't do. Where do they fall on the rubric? And then same thing. You get to the end and you got your scoring sheet. You add up your scores. Okay, so when you get into Data Gateway to enter your data in here, and see if I don't know if I can figure out how to go back. There we go. So when you get into Data Gateway to enter your data, underneath the alternate drop-down for your kiddos. What you're going to see is for each question here, each rubric page, you'll just mark a box, whether it's not yet emerging, emerging, approaching target, or at target. What you won't see are the skill sets that align in there. So when you do your data entry, you'll just mark that box that they fell within the rubric. I only have pre-K students for 1 year, so I think for me it would be better after class starts. Absolutely, if that's the case, you bet. And you may find when you go through this rubric and you look at some of these skills, you may find that you do need to kind of pre-set up some tasks, right? Like for the example, opening the book for orientation. You know, maybe you set up an opening task where you've got a circle time and the kids have to pick a free book and you're watching the kids each interact with books, right? Are they opening it, turning pages? So you may find that you have to kind of pre-set up some of those skills. Okay, so does that make sense to everybody how you're going to go through that rubric and mark those performance levels and where your kids are at? Okay. So what you enter into Data Gateway is only going to be literacy and numeracy, right? But what we do provide for you is this lifelong learning practices. And I felt like this was really a pretty important area for our students with significant cognitive disabilities, because a lot of times we're tracking these sort of things anyway. So these are the exact same lifelong learning practices that you find in the PEEP entry. The rubrics pretty much are the same. You score the same way. Are we entering these into Data Gateway list?
The alternate, yes.
The life learning, and you will enter your scores into Data Gateway. So you will find the life learning practices there as well. So pretty self-explanatory. So when you're looking at this, right, no response is your 0, and as you move up, goes into your 3 points. So your points go from 0 at the bottom up to the top. Okay, I thought we only gave the assessment to the ones that came in the fall.
That goes back up to the question that Wendy asked about, do we administer this assessment to students who come later in the year? You are welcome to administer to a student at any point in time, but you only record the data in the Data Gateway for those students that are given the assessment in the 4 week before to 4 week after window. Does that help to clarify?
Then do we do the exit? Yes, you'll do the exit. So even if you don't get an entry, do an exit anyway. And for the sake of yourself, for data, and especially for our IEP kiddos, right? Like hopefully you've got some IEP goals that align to your standards here. And this is really good progress monitoring too, so that you could have that beneficial piece as well. Yeah. Good questions.
If the student is enrolled in the school during the testing window, you have to assess them, even if they weren't there at the beginning.
Okay, so just clarified, if you have a student enrolled in your school during the testing window, whether it's entry or exit or one or the other, you're expected to administer. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Data Gateway. I don't have any screenshots for you. They're still working on it. We'll talk about that in just a minute, Liz says. But you will enter into Data Gateway the same way that your other one does. You'll have a tab that says alternate. And then, like I explained, you'll just enter those proficiencies, whether they were not emerging, emerging, approaching target, or at target. That's what you'll enter into Data Gateway. It'll calculate the scores for you. And then after we do standard setting, we'll have a better understanding of what those scores are, where typically most of our kiddos fell. So we talked about it's an operational field test year. We will be looking at those scores for you, and we will hopefully be able to have some good data and be able to produce growth for you guys. That's our biggest thing coming out of both our pre-K assessment and we did for our KEEP was looking at growth. We've got the same tasks and assessment from beginning to end. What kind of growth are our kiddos making? So in a quick 30-minute training, any lingering questions other than materials, which I know you still need access to those. So let me give you right there email addresses. So if you email me, tracy.gooley@schools.utah.gov, I will email you both the rubric and the scoring guide. Okay, and if you have any questions around, should my students take this, not take this, how do I administer, please feel free to shoot me an email. I am pretty good at responding as quickly as possible, and don't hesitate to ask questions. Okay, we are a school that has 3 to 5 year olds. Do we do it each year, just their last year before kindergarten? So you're going to do this just their last year before kindergarten. So 4-year-old preschool. Does that answer that for you, Alyssa? Okay, perfect. If there are no more questions around the alternate assessment, I am going to turn this over to you. Do you have your PowerPoint? Okay, I'm going to put us on mute for a moment while we switch gears here, and then we'll be right back. Hold on one sec. All right, thank you for hanging in there with us while we switched over our presentations. This is Sydney Carter talking. I'm the Assessment Development Coordinator at the Utah State Board of Education. So we are here for the PEEP Entry training. I know many of you joined early for the alternate assessment training, and now we're going to jump into the general assessment for the PEEP Entry.
You have to, yeah. So you have to actually click on the.
There we go. Okay, so the purpose of the PEEP, for those who administer the PEEP, it is really to look at program effectiveness. So we're looking at the people who are utilizing one of these grants for the high quality school readiness grants or the high quality school readiness expansion grants, looking at program effectiveness. And we go through literacy, numeracy, and lifelong learning practices. And all of those elements are reported to us at the Utah State Board of Education. So today we're going to be covering some of the logistics. We're going to review each of the questions, and then we'll review the accommodations for each of those questions. So really what we're looking at, like I mentioned with the purpose, is we're trying to understand the influence and impact of the pre-kindergarten for both short-term and long-term. So we're looking at program effectiveness in both the short-term as well as in the long-term and how these students fare once they attend kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. We're looking at providing opportunities for you at the school, the local area, to make some data-informed decisions and to also look at the cost-benefit analysis of early learning initiatives. So really what we're trying to do is to show, look, these preschool programs, pre-kindergarten programs really work and help prepare students for kindergarten and hopefully make a case for providing more opportunities for more students to participate in the future. So the structure and the setting of the PEEP, anyone could administer the PEEP. Any educator, any preschool teacher or person who works at the school can administer the PEEP as long as they've been trained. It is an individual administration, so you'll be working one-on-one, administering the assessment to the student one-on-one, both at the entry and at the exit. This providing this webinar, watching this, whether you're watching it live or recorded, this serves as you being trained on the PEEP, or you can also train other people on the PEEP administration. So the testing window for the PEEP, it needs to be administered 4 weeks before the first day of school until 4 weeks after the first day of school. So there's an 8-week window total. It's a pretty big window. We have a couple places that like to test their students before they start classes so they can sort out the classes and where students will go, and other places that like to give the students a couple of weeks attending school, especially if they're brand new at their 4-year-old preschool year, to get used to the test administrator and to feel more comfortable with the person that's administering the assessment. So it varies, and we wanted to make sure we provided opportunities for whichever works best for your location. So 4 weeks before the first day of pre-kindergarten to 4 weeks after the first day. So you can administer during that 8-week window. And like Tracy mentioned before, I want to reiterate this. If you have a student that enrolls after those first 4 weeks of school, you can still administer the assessment to them, but you will not provide the data to the state. So we only need data for those students who are enrolled up until the first 4 weeks of school. That's the same as for the exit. If you have students that are enrolled in your school during the last 4 weeks of school for the exit assessment,
you would still administer the assessment even if they weren't enrolled during the beginning of the year. So if they're enrolled in your school during the testing window, you test them. If they enroll after that, you can still test them, but you just don't provide the data to us at the state office. So we'll switch really quickly. Oh, just a teeny bit. It doesn't want to stay. There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay, so then after you administer the assessment, you can choose to enter the data either live while you're administering, or if you'd like to do paper pencil and come back in and enter the data later, you can do that. You'll see the website there for entering the data, and that needs to be entered into the data gateway by September 30th is the last day that you have to enter the data. So the administration time, there are 14 scoreable questions and then 7 observational questions that you'll administer to the students. Approximately 20 minutes is the time that we've taken. That is a really conservative estimate. Most of the, when we went out and piloted testing, most of the tests took anywhere from like 11 to 15 minutes. Depending on how the students responded, if they were warming up to us quickly or not, or how long it took them to respond to some of the questions. But we would say as far as scheduling and providing parents a time, and so you can give them an approximate time for how long the assessment will take, approximately 20 minutes is a good estimate. So to prepare to administer the assessment, you're going to read through the test administration manual and make sure you're aware of all the information there. This is a standardized test, and so one of the things that gets tricky is the language. There is specific language in there that says what the administrator or the teacher can say to the student. There's a script, and so making sure that you're familiar with the script and you know what you can and can't say and what's happening. I know I just saw a note in the chat about losing audio. Is that happening across the board, or is that... Nope, looks like that's not happening for everybody else. Thank you for the responses. Okay, so reading and understand the test administration manual so you know the script that the test administrator will say. And then also making sure you work with your school administrators and the parents to get that schedule ready for when you're going to be testing the students. And then obtain that material that you'll need, as well as setting up a location. Okay, so to prepare for the assessment, you'll need a copy of the test administration manual and a copy of the student materials booklet. So we have here at the state office, we've printed copies of each of those, 1 copy for each teacher at each location. So you'll receive a copy of the test administration manual and a copy of the student materials booklet for each teacher at the location. You'll be working with Jessica Smith to make sure that we get those materials out to your location. I think there'll be a meeting next week that people will be picking up the materials within the next few weeks. That you'll have those materials ready for people, and if you're not available to come to that meeting, we'll make sure we get materials to you. If you would like to look at those beforehand, or if you don't have enough materials that you would like to use for all of your test administrators, you can always access them online. They're posted right now on the Utah State Board of Education website under the assessment page. You can go to the pre-kindergarten tab and find all of the materials that you need for test administration available online. So additionally, you'll need a copy of the scoring sheet per student. You can either print out a paper copy to do paper pencil and have a hard copy for the student, or you can enter the data immediately into the data gateway and have that available to you as you start to test. And Liz will get into a little bit more detail about how you look at the items and input the scores into the data gateway. So additionally, you'll need a pencil and a blank sheet of paper for the students to use on one of the items where they are writing. And you'll need a set of 5 basic counting manipulatives. So anything that you use in your class, but the manipulatives should be, let me make sure I move this so I'm getting the colors right. You'll need 5 basic counting manipulatives. It can be blocks, cubes, Rubik's cubes, any of those, not Rubik's cubes, what are they called, the math? Unifix cubes, that's what I'm thinking of, thank you. So whatever manipulatives you have in your class, you can use those. You just need a set of 5 that are identical to each other. And then additionally to those 5, you'll need a set of 12 identical manipulatives that you'll need 4 red, 4 yellow, and 4 blue to make up that 12. So whatever the manipulatives are, have 4 red, 4 yellow, and 4 blue. And they cannot vary in size or shape. They need to be identical. And then finally, you'll want either copies from the student materials book or a sheet protector, because there are a few pages where the students will write or circle or point out different items on those pages. And so you may want either a copy for each individual student or sheet protectors and dry erase markers for the student to be able to respond. Okay, at the beginning of the TAM, at the Teacher Administration Manual, the Test Administration Manual, there is a parent questionnaire. And this parent questionnaire is something you can provide to the parents. It's available in English in the TAM, but also English and Spanish online. So you can provide that for the parents. We're just interested to see, did the student participate in preschool when they were 3 years old? If they did, what was the name of the preschool and how long they attended, as well as how many days a week and how much time they spent. So this is to help us look at program effectiveness as well. And so we can see, did the 2 students participate in preschool previously, or is this their first experience? Okay, so we're going to get started. And the first thing is from the TAM. If you have the TAM with you, or if you're following along online with the TAM, you can turn to page 13, and that is the opening task. So this is not a scored item. It is something that is meant to help the student become more familiar with the test administrator. So you can read this in the student's native language. This is something that can be read if you have a translator. You can ask the students the question. The greeting is just, my name is blank, what is your name, how old are you? So just to kind of get to know the student a little bit. That's also something in the beginning pages of the TAM, it mentions you can provide any kind of encouragement for the student to keep going, as long as it's not something that helps them answer the question in any way. But you can say keep going or things like that, encouraging things too. We know these are 4-year-old students, and we know they might get hesitant in answering questions. So you can provide any kind of encouragement as long as it's not influencing the student's answer. All right, so then after this first initial greeting of introducing yourself and asking the student a little bit about themselves, we move on to our literacy questions. So Liz is going to jump in and talk about literacy. Oh, geez, sorry. Is that a three-legged table? It is. Look at that. Don't lean on it.
Okay, this is Liz Williams. I'm the Elementary ELA Assessment Specialist here at the Utah State Board of Education. And one of my job duties is overseeing the PEEP. So I'm just going to go through the literacy items today. You'll see on the screen there are 8 literacy questions covering vocabulary, directionality, concept of letter number, letter recognition, handwriting, word parts, letter sounds, and oral language. So we'll go ahead and get started with question number 1. If you have the test administration manual in front of you, this is page 16 for question number 1. And you'll also need, excuse me, the student materials booklet that has the page, excuse me. Okay. Sorry about that. The student materials booklet on the bottom right-hand corner of each page, it tells you which question number that page correlates to. In your test administration manual, there are 3 different colored sections. The instructions are yellow. The scoring is like a rose or dusty pink. And then accommodated instructions are in purple at the bottom. And you'll notice that across all items, the outline is the same for each question. It tells you in the instructions bar in yellow to read aloud script in bold. So again, this is the script that Sid was referring to earlier, that the teachers are allowed to read out loud exactly as written in the manual. If you see information in italics, that is an action that the teacher should take or something that the teacher should do. So we're just going to go through this first question in a little bit more detail so you kind of get a feel for how this administration will go. It says at the top of the page to display the student material sheet for question number 1. So you would just take the student materials booklet and put it in front of the student so they can see the picture. Then the teacher would say out loud, look at this picture of a teacher and some children in a classroom. The children are doing many different activities. Point to the child with the blocks. And you'll see after the end of that first prompt, it tells you to pause for response up to 5 seconds. If the student does not respond within 5 seconds, then you would continue to the next prompt and then read through all 4 prompts. On the scoring sheet, you will mark how the student responded to each prompt. I do believe in the data gateway, it looks a little bit different than it does on paper. So what I did when I went out to field test this item is I circled or put an X where the child pointed so that I was able to go back after the fact and see exactly what their response was and how to score. So for this item, the student will receive 1 point for pointing to or gesturing to the correct object for a total of 4 points possible. And that's all outlined under the Dusty Rose colored scoring section. Throughout the test administration manual, you'll also notice that there are some specific accommodated instructions for each question. These are given based on the need or the disability that the student has. So there are some overall accommodations that apply, like ASL. You can sign to students who have a hearing impairment, or Braille materials for those students who have visual impairments. But this specific question gives an accommodated instruction that says if students are blind or visually impaired, you would give them a certain set of manipulatives and then ask the following prompts. So this is getting more towards that standard of using common prepositions, but it allows the students to respond to the same prepositions just with a different set of materials. I forgot to mention when we started at the top, there's also which content area this question addresses and the standard alignments that go along with each question. And then at the top of the next page in the test administration manuals, it will show you a box that has the specific materials that you need for the item and also a sample record of how to score the response on the score sheet. All right, so that's pretty much it for question number 1, vocabulary. We'll move on to question number 2. It covers directionality. There are student materials that you will need for this question, and they are the ones for question number 2 in the student materials booklet. It's a picture that you see here on the screen of the little girl holding a bunch of balloons. You will display the material in front of the student and read the script exactly as it is printed in the test administration manual. One thing to note, if there is a discontinue rule, you'll see it at the bottom of the instruction section, and it will say discontinue rule, and it'll be underlined in yellow. And in this case, if the student pauses for 5 seconds, you repeat the question. If they're still unable to respond after that additional 5 seconds, then you would just record a score of 0 and proceed to the next prompt. So there are 2 prompts for this question, sorry. 2 prompts for this question. The first one says, look at this picture. It has a picture and words. Now I'm going to read to you. Point to where I should start reading. If the student points to the word the, and then points to little, then girl is holding, and continues through the rest, then you don't have to ask the next prompt that says, now show me which way I should go, because they've already indicated in that first question, you start here and you go this way. If they just point to the first word, or if they point to, say, a part of the picture, then you would ask that second prompt, now show me which way I should go. Okay, so this one, you read the script exactly as it is on the page, unless the student provides a response that doesn't make it necessary to read the second part. Now, before you move on to the next question, make sure you say, now I'll read the sentence to you. You know, you put the picture in front of the students and you talk about, I'm going to read this to you. And then they point and you take it away and put it aside without ever reading to it. I did that when I went out and did some field testing. So just make sure that you actually read the sentence to the students before you move on. They would receive 1 point for pointing to the and 1 point for showing you left to right on which way I should go. So 2 points possible for this item. And there is one accommodation for students that are orthopedically impaired. And instead of saying show me, you would say, or the teacher will say show me instead of saying point to. All right. There is a question in the chat box that says, do you track with the finger when you read? And you can absolutely point and track with your finger as you read. That is fine. Not required, but acceptable. Okay, question number 3. Again, there are student materials for this question. It's the material sheet that you see here at the bottom of the page. You would display that in front of the student and just simply say point to a number. Pause for the student to point and then say now point to a letter. They would receive 1 point for pointing to a number and 1 point for pointing to a letter. Oh, note about self-corrects. If you're administering this question to the students and you say point to a number and say they point to the hashtag or the pound symbol, and then before you move on to the next one, they say no, wait, and they point to the number 5, you could give them the point for self-correcting before you moved on to the next question. Now, if they point to the hashtag and you say now point to a letter and say they point to the letter T and they go, oh, this one wasn't a number, you still would keep that score as marked incorrect because they were unable to answer it correctly without the prompt of an additional question. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, feel free to ask a question in the chat box. And Heidi, there is an email for the alternative assessment. It's Tracy Gooley, and her email will show up again at the end of the slide deck for you to copy. Okay, so question number 3 is pretty basic, pretty straightforward. Concept of letter and number. We'll move on to question number 4, letter recognition. This requires the use of student materials for question number 4 and a blank piece of paper. So you'll display the student materials for question number 4, and it's just simply a sheet of all of the letters. They do show up in letter pairs. So we have the uppercase and the lowercase letters listed together. The set of letters, can't read the chat box and talk at the same time.
Oh, that's hard.
The set of letters, they're ordered in a way that research has shown to be easier to recognize to more difficult to recognize towards the end. So you'll notice for this question, there's a discontinue rule that applies, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So display the materials for the student, cover up everything but the first row with a blank piece of paper, and say, I will point to each set of letters and you will tell me the name of those letters. So there are a couple of points to remember for this question. You pause for up to 3 seconds on each letter pair. If the student doesn't respond within 3 seconds, proceed to the next letter pair. If the student says the letter sound, you can prompt as necessary, just say the letter name. Once they've attempted all of the names in the first row, you can move the blank piece of paper to the next row and repeat for all of the remaining rows. Now you'll see here there is a discontinue rule on this page. If they miss all of the letter names in the first row, move the blank piece of paper below the next row. Slide your finger under that row while you say, look at all the sets of letters on this row. Point to and tell me the letter names you know. You can pause for up to 5 seconds on each row to allow them to point and tell you all of the letter names that they know. And if they don't say anything within that 5 seconds, then you'll move the piece of paper to the next row and repeat that same instruction for all remaining rows. The one thing that's important to note here is that you have to give the student the opportunity to respond to every single row of letters. It might be that they know the letter Z, which is in the next to last row at the bottom, but if you don't allow them to see that, you're not giving them the opportunity to respond. So just make sure that you slide the paper down one row at a time and give them the chance to respond, pausing for up to 5 seconds. Obviously, if they point to a letter and tell you the name, then you would wait 5 more seconds before you move on. Okay? The scoring of this item might seem like it's a little bit much. There are 26 letters in the alphabet, so there are 26 points possible. I don't know if we've talked about standard setting yet or not, but what's going to happen is after we go through this operational field test in the fall this year, we'll take all of the data from the assessment and we'll go through what is called a standard setting process. So we'll look at items and see how students responded, if there were any trends. When you're talking 14 questions on an assessment and one item is worth 26 points possible, it's a pretty heavy proportion of the points available. So it might be that next fall when we give the PEEP entry, you'll see a scaled score on this question where if they get between 1 and 3 letters correct, they receive 1 point. If they get between 4 and so many, so that it's not worth as many points as it is currently. So I know a lot of people seem to get a little bit stressed out and worried about the value of points for this question. Just know that it might change in the future, okay? There are also some specific accommodated instructions listed down here for different blind or visual impairments, orthopedic impairments, and also nonverbal students as well. Now, anything in these accommodated instructions, anything in the accommodated instructions has to be written into a child's 504 or IEP plan in order for you to use those accommodations. You can't just decide, well, my friend here is struggling with this item, so I'm just going to give them this accommodation. For standardization purposes, those accommodations only apply to 504 students with those appropriate 504 IEP plans. Okay? All right, question number 5. This is the one question where in the materials we said you would need either copies of the material, which you see right here on the screen, the shapes, so paper copies with a pencil, or put this item in a sheet protector and give the students a dry erase marker. Either option is acceptable. The one thing to note, if you choose to use a paper copy, you have to give the child a pencil. No markers, no crayons, and it doesn't matter if it's a skinny pencil, a fat pencil, ones that are shaped like triangles. The type of pencil doesn't matter, just so much that it's a graphite pencil and not another marking utensil. So if you choose to do the sheet protector and the dry erase marker, you can just have the student answer the question, then erase it and reuse it for the next child. It's up to you, whichever one you decide to do. Either way is fine. You would display the materials in front of the student, so either sheet protector and a marker or the piece of paper and a pencil. And you would say, please draw this shape as you point to the box with the first shape in it, here as you point to the empty box below. This is so much easier to do in person when you have it up on the screen and you can model. So hopefully that's clear. You're going to point to the first box that has the horizontal line in it and say, please draw this shape or this line here as you point to the empty box below. So it's really important, again, to go through the test administration manual before you administer this to students, because sometimes if you're not accustomed to what it says or what you're supposed to do, it's going to come out a little bit awkward the first few times. So we do recommend practicing and becoming very familiar with the test administration manual. One thing to note.
I believe you can use your
Cursor.
cursor and
Oh.
we can see it. Can we see
Can
it?
you?
Yeah.
Okay,
There you
so please draw this line here. One thing you don't want to do is to say, please draw this line as you trace it with your finger, okay? So you're just going to point to the box that contains the line or the shape and then point to the empty box below. And that prompting is just so the students know what you're talking about and where you want them to draw. You'll repeat the direction for each line or shape, and then the student will receive 1 point for each recognizable or correct line or shape. You'll notice in the scoring section it says, to be correct, the student must demonstrate the properties of the shape. So a circle must be closed. The vertical horizontal cross must be two intersecting lines. There is a little bit of variance. We understand that these are for your 4-year-old children, and we don't expect them to draw a perfectly straight horizontal line. So long as that it is mostly a straight line and doesn't have a certain angle that it moves up or moves down drastically. The circle must be a fully closed shape. It can resemble more of an ovalish shape. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. The one thing to note about the horizontal lines, if the student takes their pencil and they draw the line straight down, and then they pick up the pencil and come over, and then stop when they get to the vertical line, pick up their pencil and move it to the other side and go straight across, that wouldn't count as a correct shape because the two lines, it's 3 lines, not 2, and they don't necessarily intersect because the child stopped the pencil movement and didn't continue through for the intersection. I've had a lot of specific questions about, can you give us some examples of shapes that would count as correct or would not count as correct? And down here on the bottom of the screen, there is the sample record of response that shows you the child scored 2 out of 4 points. They wouldn't receive credit for the circle because it's not closed. And then the intersecting lines, or the horizontal vertical cross, wouldn't have received credit either because the lines don't intersect. So use your best judgment. We're not looking for perfection here. We're just looking to see, are they able to replicate the properties of shapes? I forgot the next thought that I had. I was going somewhere with that. So again, just use your discretion in scoring this item. Best judgment, we trust you. And if anything else, you can see where students either have strong fine motor skills or they need some support and instruction for the fine motor skills. So you can make some instructional decisions based on this item. Okay, so we're gonna take a minute, let you process that, have a little bit of discussion if you're in a group with others, and are there any questions? Feel free to type them in the chat box. I think you might be able to unmute your mic to ask a question, but just make sure that you mute it back when you're done. Okay, so we'll just take about a minute and wait and see if there's any questions, and if not, we'll move on to the next item. Okay, so seeing no questions, we're gonna move on to question number 6, which is word parts. For this question, you don't need any materials because it is a phonemic awareness question and it's all auditory. A word of note, when we went out and field tested, this question was either one that the students got right away and had no problems with, or you got the look from the little student sitting across from you that had no idea what you were talking about or asking them to do. So this is one of those items that we'll look at during standard setting and see if it is a valid item and if there are improvements that can be made or if it's good like it is. So just have a little bit of patience with this and know that it's heavy on the vocabulary, it's heavy on the instructions, but we're trying to give students the opportunity to respond. So you'll say, listen to the word doghouse. Doghouse is made up of 2 words. The first word is dog, the last word is house. Listen again, doghouse. What is the first word? You pause. If the student responds correctly, then say, that's correct. If no response or an incorrect response is given, provide the first part of the word and have the student repeat. So you would say, the first part of the word is dog. What's the first word? Then they would respond dog. Then you move on to the next prompt that says, now tell me the first word you hear in baseball. So there's a little less scaffolding. You ask the student to respond. If they respond correctly, you say that's correct. If no response or an incorrect response is given, again, provide them the first part of the word, have them repeat. There is a prompt here that if they just say the letter name or repeat the whole word, you can prompt as necessary. Just say the first word you hear. And then you give them one more example. Now tell me the first word you hear in sandbox. They respond correctly, say that's correct. If they don't, provide the first part of the word, have the student repeat. And then again, if they give you the letter name or repeat the whole word, you can prompt, just say the first word you hear. Then you'll move on and you'll say, now tell me the first word you hear in these words. Say each word in a normal speaking rate. You don't want to add any extra emphasis on the syllables like sun, flower, because then that's prompting them, giving them a little bit extra support. So you would just read it at a normal talking rate, sunflower, cupcake, then continue through the list. Now, if they are unable to produce the initial word and the first compound word, you may repeat the instructions. So it would sound like this. Now tell me the first word you hear in these words. Sunflower. There was no student response, so I would say, tell me the first word you hear in these words. Sunflower. If the student still cannot produce the initial word, move on to the next word. Mark those that are incorrect or skipped with a slash, and then record the correct number of responses on the scoring sheet. Discontinue rule. If they miss the first 3, stop the item, record a score of 0, and go to the next question. Okay? 1 point for each correct response. 5 points possible for this question. All right, next item is question number 7, letter sounds. This one requires a blank piece of paper and 2 pages from the student materials booklet. The first one is question number 7A, as numbered on the bottom right-hand corner. And then the second one is question number 7B. You'll display 7A. in front of the student, point to the letter pair and say, these letters make the sound. What sound do they make? If the student responds correctly, say, that's correct. If they don't respond correctly, say, these letters make the sound Then you would turn to page 7B and cover all but the first row with a blank piece of paper and say, I will point to each letter pair and you will tell me the sound those letters make. Again, like other questions, the letter naming question, you pause for 3 seconds on each letter pair to give them time to respond. If there is no response within 3 seconds, move to the next letter pair. If they respond with the letter name, you can prompt as necessary. Just say the letter sound. Once you've gone through the whole first row, you'll move the blank paper down to the next row and repeat. Now there are some bullet points here under the instructions for specific cases. If they give you a long vowel sound, ask if they know the other sound. Now the one thing you don't want to do here is if it's the letter A and the child responds A, you don't want to say, well, what other sound does the letter A make? You don't want to prompt the student by giving them the letter name. You would just say, can you tell me the other sound that letter makes? You're only going to accept the short vowel sounds as correct responses. Obviously, if they provide you with long vowel sounds, you can make note of it and address things instructionally that you notice during this assessment, but only score correct responses as short vowel sounds. And likewise, if they give the soft sound for G or C, you can ask if they know the other sound, and only those hard sounds will be counted as correct. It also gives you some instruction again about self-correcting. Again, if they're up at the top and they look at the letter B and you point to it and they say D, and then you get down to the next row and when you point to the D, they look at you and they say, oh, that's a D. The other one was a B. You would give them credit. Oh, it is sounds. Thank you, Whitney. If you point to the D and they say duh, and they realize that the sound that they gave you for the letter B was the D sound, you can't go back and give them credit for the sound for the letter B, but you can give them credit for the correct sound for the letter D. Okay? Any questions about that? Short vowels, hard sounds, soft corrects are okay if they correct before moving on to the next response. And then there is a discontinue rule, again, just like the letter naming question. If they miss the whole first row, move the blank paper and ask them to look at all the letter pairs on this row and point to and tell me the letter sounds you know. Of note, it is important that the student is physically pointing, if they're capable, to the letter. So say you're on the second row and the child says Z and doesn't point to the letter. You don't know that they're able to correlate the letter Z to the sound Z unless they point to that letter on the page. Is that clear? Does that make sense for everyone? Correct. Kayla, there is a question in the comment box that says, so if they said the correct sound for B after they realized when they saw D, that wouldn't count. No, because we're looking for the automaticity piece as well. And they give you the response incorrectly, and they don't realize until they actually see that letter D later that the sound they saw originally was the wrong answer that they had given. You're welcome. All right, so again, 26 points possible for this item, 1 point for each letter named. each letter sound named. And subject to change after standard setting in the fall. Okay, last question for literacy, oral language. This is all basically a discussion with the student, so you don't need any materials for the student. There are 3 prompts that are listed in the instruction section for this item. If the student answers with 5 or more words in one complete sentence that's on topic, you can score it, that response, and then move on to question number 9. You don't have to give all 3 prompts if they get the highest score possible on the first one. Those additional prompts are there for those students who might take a minute to warm up. If you ask them 1 question, they'll give you a short answer. If you ask them 2 questions, the next answer will be a little bit longer, and they'll be more likely to engage. So, is anybody else having trouble with your sounds? Emily, can you hear? Okay, doesn't look like there's an issue. All right, perfect. So, on this one, prompt number 1, you're going to say to the student, I would like to learn more about you. Tell me about your favorite toy. You'll pause and then ask a follow-up question if the child doesn't respond with 5 or more words in a complete on-topic sentence. So I'm going to borrow our friend's break here, and I'm going to kind of role play this so that you can hear what it sounds like. So just respond with like a few words. Tell me about your favorite toy.
I like dinosaurs.
Okay, so her response was, I like dinosaurs. It was a complete sentence, but it only had 3 words. So I would continue with, what else can you tell me about dinosaurs?
Dinosaurs are fun.
Dinosaurs are fun. Again, it's a complete sentence, but still only 3 words. So I would continue to the next prompt, and I would ask the next question until I was able to receive 5 or more words in one complete sentence. If she only responds with 3 words for each of the remaining prompts, she would score 3 points because it was 3 words and 1 complete sentence. And then she would score 1 point because her response was on topic. Okay, so you only record the score for the highest scoring response. Whether it's the first one or the last one, you can pick from any of the 3 prompts and the additional follow-up question for each prompt. Record the highest score. In the scoring section, you can see that it breaks down the responses from 5 points all the way to 0 points. If you score the student response with the most words out of the 5 points possible, then you score the content of the response separately. They would receive 1 point if the response was on topic. Now, say you asked them about their favorite toy and they said, my brother watches cartoons on the TV all day and I never get to watch what I want to watch. It is a complete sentence. It's more than 5 words. So you could score 5 points for the oral language response and 0 points for a response that is on topic. So we're looking at both content and the production, but those 2 things are scored separately for this item. Okay? Any questions on the literacy section? Okay, we're going to switch over, and Whitney's going to talk to you about the numeracy items. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll answer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Whitney Barlow, and I'm the Math Assessment Specialist at USBE. So I work on the PEEP development, KEEP development, and then all math assessments up to high school. So we're just going to continue on going through the test administration manual. We're on page 30 for question number 9. So in numeracy, it has the same setup as all the literacy questions where the standard and content area are at the top. And then all of the instructions are in the our yellow part. Scoring is in the dusty rose, and then the accommodated instructions are in the purple. So if you look at this, we have 6 numeracy questions. So we'll just go through these one by one. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box as we are going through. So question 9, this one is shape discrimination. On this one, you will need the student materials page that has the shapes on it. You'll put that in front of the student, and then your script that you read says, here are some shapes, point to a square on the page. So you're not doing any pointing for the student. You're just putting it in front of them and giving them or reading the script to them. You'll pause for the student's response and then move on to the next one. After they've responded, point to a circle, pause, point to a triangle. And we do have a discontinue rule on this one. If the student pauses for 5 seconds, repeat the instructions. If the student is still unable to respond after 5 seconds, record a score of 0 and proceed to the next shape. So on the scoring for this one, it's 1 point for each correctly identified shape, which gives us 3 points total on this one. And if you look at the scoring, the sample of record of response for this one, you can either just circle or put a mark somehow what the student responded so that you can go back and score it later if you're doing the paper and pencil scoring. And then just pay attention to your accommodated instructions there for our students who are blind or visually impaired or orthopedically impaired. Okay, moving on to question number 10. So question number 10 is rote counting. So because the students are just counting for you, there are no materials for this item. And the instructions you will give the student is please count, start at 1. And we went through a variation of different instructions for this one and decided this was the most straightforward and clear. So if you look at the instructions after you give that initial script, it says if the student doesn't count aloud, then prompt once, please start at 1 and count out loud. We've had, as we pilot tested this, students that were just counting in their head or counting with their fingers. So that's when you would use that prompt of please start at 1 and count out loud. Listen to the student count as high as possible up to 10. Record the last number that the student said correctly before an error up to 10. So if we look at the scoring for this one, the number of points that the student gets is the last number they said correctly. So if they start counting and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, they would only get 4 points for that item because the mistake happened on 5. You don't need to stop them at their mistake. Let them keep going up till 10, and at 10 is when you would stop them. And then we just have the one accommodated instruction for our nonverbal students that they will be allowed to count using their mode of communication or assistive technology. And then for how you record this one is you're just going to mark where the error occurred, and then it's the points up to that error that we'll get the points for. We'll move on to question number 11. So question number 11 is numeral recognition. So on this one in the student materials page, you will put in front of the student the page that has the 6 numbers on it. And then you will say to the student, I will point to each number and you tell me the name of the number. So you'll begin with the 3 and you'll just move your way across the top row. So from 3 to 5 to 2, and then move your way across the bottom row. On this one, you will just pause for up to 3 seconds on each number before moving on to the next one to allow the student time to respond. On your score sheet, you'll just mark any incorrect or skipped responses with a slash through the number to indicate no score. There's 6 total points for this item, and it's just 1 point for each correct number that the student identified. Our accommodated instructions, students who are blind or visually impaired, the teacher will give them the Braille number sheet, and the directive from the teacher will be, here are some numbers, tell me the numbers you know. If you don't know a number, skip it and go to the next number. And then for students who are nonverbal, the teacher, they can use any communication device that they currently use. And using the same material sheet, the teacher will say, show me the number when I say the number. And it is up to the teacher to randomize the numbers spoken. So just make sure that you get to all 6 numbers, but do it in a random order from what you see in the material sheet. So those are our first 3 numeracy questions. Are there any questions on how to administer or score these first 3 questions? Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat box, so we're going to keep moving on. The next 2 questions are ones where you are going to use those manipulatives that we talked about at the beginning of the training. So question 12 is one-to-one correspondence and cardinality. With this one, what you'll do is the set of 5 identical counters that we talked about at the beginning, you're going to put 3 of them out in a horizontal line formation. And the directive to the student will be use your finger to point to and count these objects. If the student does not count out loud, if they're just moving their finger along and counting in their head, you can give them the direction to please start again and count out loud. And then you're going to listen to how the student counts. And then the next question, so this is 2 parts right here, is how many did you count? And then you'll pause for the student's response. So we're going to go down and look at the scoring on this one. So we're going to go through the scoring for 3 objects, and then it's the same for 5. So the counting and one-to-one correspondence, there's 4 points possible total. 2 points come from the 3 objects and 2 points come from the 5 objects. So with the 3 objects, it's 2 points if the student counts the objects correctly using one-to-one correspondence. So every time they move from object to object, they are counting up with that up to the 3. It's 1 point if the student counts using one-to-one correspondence but has an error in their counting. So if they're counting up to 3 and going from one object to the next and count 1, 2, 4, they still associated a number with each object as they were counting, so they would get 1 point there. They used one-to-one correspondence, but they made a mistake in their counting. And then at 0 points if the student is unable to count the objects using one-to-one correspondence, even if just their rote counting is correct. So if they just run their finger in a line without identifying the object they're counting and count 1, 2, 3, if it didn't have a number associated with each object, then that's where we would have 0 points. So it's that connecting a number with the object as they're counting that we're scoring here. And then for the cardinality piece, it's 1 point if the student correctly tells you how many objects they counted without recounting. So if they counted and pointed to each item 1, 2, 3, and then when you say how many did you count, they should just be able to say 3 back to you. That would get them 1 full point. The other part with the cardinality is if they made a mistake in their counting, so they scored 1 object up, or 1 point up above in their one-to-one correspondence. So if they counted 1, 2, 4, that had the correct one-to-one correspondence, and then their answer to how many did you count is 4, they would still get that cardinality point because they were able to remember that last number that they counted and tell it to you without recounting the objects. And then you would go through, once you do ask those 2 questions with the 3 objects, you would place 2 more manipulatives in front of the student and ask the same questions again with the 5 objects. So use your finger to point to and count these objects, and then how many did you count? And you can still give that same prompt to please start again and count out loud if the student does not do that to begin with. So that one's a little bit more complicated on the scoring. If you have questions on that one, please let us know. We can walk you through it again. It's hard to demonstrate and talk about it without being able to show you the counters in front of us. And then we do have our different accommodated instructions. So look, there's 3 different accommodations there to be aware of. For students who are blind or visually impaired, you'll need tactile manipulatives. For students who are orthopedically impaired, you'll do the pointing and then they will count those objects. And then students who are nonverbal will be allowed to use their mode of communication. And if you look at the score sheet, so we don't have this up here, but you're just going to record the points for the 3 objects in both counting and one-to-one correspondence and cardinality, and then record the points for the 5 objects as well. Okay, we're going to move on to question 13, which is patterning and sorting. So this question has kind of 3 different tasks associated with it. So this is when you're going to want your 12 identical manipulatives that have 4 red, 4 yellow, and 4 blue. And with those 3 different colors, they all need to be the same shape and size. So if you have squares, they all need to be the same size of square. If you have teddy bears, they all need to be the same size of teddy bear. Then as we go through this one, our first task that we're going to do is sorting. So you are going to take 4 blue and 4 yellow manipulatives and say to the student, I have these blocks, chips, or cubes, whatever you're using. Please sort these by color. And then once you have said the directives, then you're going to place the manipulatives on the table in front of the student and pause for the student's response, and then record it on the scoring sheet. If the student does not respond, you can repeat the instructions, pause again, and if they still do not respond, you're going to record a score of 0. With this one, just take your cues from the student. Sometimes it takes them a second to process what they're being asked and to catch on to it. So if they're starting to interact with the manipulatives, make sure you give them the time to work through and process what they are doing. Once they've sorted it or they've just refused not to even do the task, you'll clear the manipulatives, and then you're going to get your 4 red and your 4 yellow. And then you'll say and you're going to make a pattern in a horizontal line of red, yellow, yellow. And then you'll say to the student, I made a pattern, say it with me, and you'll point to the pattern and say red, yellow, yellow. Now you copy this pattern, and you'll point to the pattern as you say that here, and you'll point to a space below your own pattern. And then you'll hand the remaining 2 red and 2 yellow manipulatives to the student, and then pause for the student's response. Same with the sorting task. You can, if they do not respond, you can repeat the instructions. And then if the student still does not respond, record a score of 0. For this task, we are looking that the student repeats the pattern below your pattern. So if they add on to it, that's a different skill, and that would still be a score of 0. So it's repeating the pattern below the teacher's pattern is what we're looking for on this patterning activity. Once you've recorded your score for the second task, you'll clear the manipulatives again, and then you'll pick up your 4 red and your 4 blue. And you will say to the student, now I am going to make a new pattern, and you'll create a horizontal pattern of blue, red, And then you'll tell the student, say it with me, and point to your pattern, blue, red, blue, red. And then you'll say, now put the color that comes next here. And you'll point to the space at the end of the pattern and then hand the students the 2 red and 2 blue manipulatives that are left. You'll wait for the student to place the manipulative and then say, show me what comes after that, and point to the next space. If the student gets what they're supposed to do and they just start placing the patterns or the manipulatives on their own and just finish that pattern off, you don't need to say that part, just let them go. But if they place the next one and pause and wait for your directions, then you say, show me what comes after that, continuing to point to the end of the pattern. And then you'll repeat that until all of the manipulatives have been used. So on this one, it's 1 point for each task. So it's 1 point they either sorted correctly or they didn't. 1 point they either correctly duplicated the pattern or they didn't. And then 1 point for they either correctly extended the pattern or they didn't. So that is our patterning and sorting one. This one, it moves pretty smoothly once you start doing it, but it's a lot to think through and comprehend as you're getting ready to do this task. Are there any questions on the patterning and sorting one specifically? And just one note, make sure you look at the accommodated instructions on this one. It has a completely different set of instructions for students who are blind or visually impaired, and then for our students who are orthopedically impaired. And then just a note, it says students who are nonverbal are not required to say the pattern with the teacher. And that's true with all students. If they're not going to say the pattern with you, you don't have to force them to do that. They can still move forward and get full points if they don't repeat the pattern with you. Okay, we're going to move on to our last numeracy question. Question number 14 is quantity description. It's on page 38 in the teacher administration manual. And this one does have a student material page. So you're looking for the buttons in the student material page. And then you also need a blank piece of paper with this one. So you'll place the button page in front of the student and use the blank page to cover the 3 bottom rows so that you're only showing the first row to the students. And you'll say, tell me which one has more dots. This one pointing to the first button or this one pointing to the second button. And then you'll record the student's response on the scoring sheet, move the paper down and repeat the question. Tell me which one has more dots, this one pointing to the first button or this one pointing to the second button. And you'll just move your way down repeating that for all 4 rows. And it's 1 point for each correctly identified group. And there are 4 points possible. For students who are orthopedically impaired, our accommodation there is that they can use their mode of identification, for example, eye gaze or assistive technology. The selection field might need to be on separate cards for this one just to allow for greater division between the answer selections for those students. And that is the end of our numeracy section. Are there any questions about any of the numeracy questions that we covered? Okay, so that's the end of the questions that you administer to the students. So after that one, we have our 7 observational questions, which are the lifelong learning practices. So for this one, what you will do is after you complete the testing with the student, you'll thank them for taking the test and send them on their way, whether it's with their parents if you're doing it before school or back with the class. And then you're going to answer these 7 questions. And you're basing this on your observations of the student as you administer the tests. Because some people are doing this before school starts and they don't know their students. Some people might be doing it after school. Just to standardize where we're getting this information from, you're basing your observations during your test administration. So you'll answer the opportunities to respond, so how a student responded, if they sustained their effort, their attention and focus, listen and follows directions, quality of response. And then there's two more on the, if you turn the page over to 40, self-confidence and task switching. So on these ones, there's up to 3 points possible per item. With the way that they're arranged, the top answer is your 3-point answer, and then they go down by 1 point each one. So if we look at question 15, opportunities to respond, confident would be 3 points, and then no response would be 0 points. So it just counts down that list. These are something that you will enter into the data gateway. This is something that's being looked at and data is being collected on. So just make sure that you do take the time to answer these observation questions for each student regarding to the lifelong learning practices from the standards. And then once you've done that and enter your information into Data Gateway, you're done with the assessment part of that for each student. So Liz is going to come and talk about scoring and how to use the Data Gateway.
Okay, so you can score pencil paper or you can score online via the Data Gateway. For this first year, my personal recommendation would be, sorry,
I just noticed it.
it's bull in a china shop, friends. Naming numbers and counting. Okay, there's a quick question in the chat box. For exit, they will count, sorry, I missed the part about naming numbers. They will count up to 20. Whitney, what is the naming of numbers on the exit? Do you remember?
I believe it's up. I have it.
It's on Adobe. Just a second and we'll find you an answer for the naming numbers question.
It's up to 10.
Yes, it is up to 10 for naming numbers, 0 to 10, and then counting, rote counting would be up to 20. You're welcome. All right, so back to the scoring. For this first year, I would recommend highly that you score pencil paper, and we'll talk about the reasons behind that in just a second. So if you're going to score pencil paper, you'll need to make a copy of the score sheet that you can find in Appendix B. One nice part about that paper score sheet is you don't have to necessarily tally up the scores because the Data Gateway will automatically calculate scores for you once you put it in. You'll see a note on the screen, like once the submit button has been clicked, you as a classroom teacher cannot make any changes to that. So just make sure that the information that you are submitting is accurate and you're ready to submit and finalize the data. To enter the data, you're going to have to access the Data Gateway. And you'll click on the link in the PowerPoint and it'll take you right there. Or you just type in datagateway.schools.utah.gov. Okay, I'm going to try clicking on this link and see what will happen. See if it will continue to share the screen with you. So
The interpreters are coming.
everything is gone. Okay. So it's not, give me just a second. I'm going to see if I can fix this. Can still see interpreters. It won't share because you're only sharing the PowerPoint. I know here. Okay, give me just 1 second. We're gonna get a little bit of tech help here. All right, here we go. Back in business. So datagateway.schools.utah.gov is the website where you're going to have to navigate to. Unless you already have a Data Gateway account, you're going to have to register for the Data Gateway. You'll do that by clicking on the top right-hand corner where it says register. I can't, the chat box is here.
Can I read the question?
There's a question online.
Okay, Mallory's question says, I am looking at the registration site and it requires an LEA, but at the neighborhood house, we are not a district or academy. Should we use the Salt Lake School District because that's what district we are technically in, even though not all of our children attend that district?
No, please don't do that. Let me get clarification from IT to make sure that I give you the correct information. I was told that everybody was in the UTREC system for Data Gateway. So it's neighborhood house. I'll verify with IT, and then can you just send your information, your contact information to Whitney in the chat box? You can just send it to her privately, and then that way I can get in contact with you. Okay? Thanks. Thanks for pointing that out. So you are correct. When you click on the register button, you have to enter your first and last name, and then your email address and a password. The email address will be what becomes your username. You are required to select an LEA from the drop-down list, and many of the private providers should be listed. I was told that they were all there. It might be that the neighborhood house does come up under Salt Lake. I can see here in just a second, but there are several private providers in here as well as regular school districts and charter schools. So you'll find the district, charter, or private provider that you're affiliated with, and select that. This is the one field that is required for you to input down here at the bottom, other than your social security number. So you have to put the last 4 digits of that. If you have a Cactus ID, great, put it in. If you don't, that's fine. You can still set up an account. The Cactus ID is not required. If you are a licensed teacher, please input your Cactus ID. It'll make the whole account creation process just a little bit easier for everyone. So once you've done that, you'll go back to the main page, the datagateway.schools.utah.gov, and instead of clicking on register, you're going to click on login. Now I'm going to navigate away from this site to our development site so that I can actually get in and show you without accessing PII for certain students. So hopefully this website loads correctly. It looks just the same. So you will click the login button and you will type in your username and password. And you might have to wait until you get a confirmation email from Data Gateway telling you that your account has been created. Once you do that, you can sign in. Oh. You can sign in with your username and password. There we go. All right, now the first step that you're gonna look for is the My Tools button that is right here at the top on the red bar. It says My Tools. If you do not have a My Tools button, then this is where you have to contact your district charter or private assessment director or the person who is in charge of the PEEP assessment to make sure that you have been assigned the correct user role. If you have the My Tools button, it will drop down with a list of choices. These available assessments are assigned depending on your user role, so you probably won't see all of the choices that I have here, but you should have the one that says PEEP assessment. So you're going to click on the PEEP assessment, and it's going to navigate you to the Utah's PEEP page. So this is a super cute page that will load, and again, depending on your user role, you may or may not see some of the things that are here. If you're a classroom teacher, you won't have the ability to roster. That is an ability that only LEA admins or school admins have the option to do. You will eventually see some information under reports, and then you most likely will not see the section down here under assessments. So you're going to click on Administer PEEP, and then it'll populate to this page. Based on the time of year, it will most likely populate to entry during the entry window and exit during the exit window. But you'll see right here that there's also the option for alt entry and alt exit. So we're just going to start with the entry. The information in the districts and the school will populate based on user roles. Since I have state level access, there's the neighborhood bus. It populates all of these options for me to pick from. But if you're, say, in Alpine, at Alpine School, it will automatically pull up that you're at Alpine and Alpine School. And if you're a classroom teacher, it will automatically populate your class roster for you. So this is the main page. You can see here this class has 2 students, and it provides the student's name, their SSID, the literacy points, the numeracy points, the number of points for lifelong learning, and the date that the assessment was recorded. Now, this is just a development site, so not everything is quite in order the way that it will be when you log into the actual live data gateway site. Things might look a little bit different, so this is just for training purposes with masked information of students that aren't real. So we're going to go down here and work with No Way Jose, and we're going to click on the Not Started link. Now, once you access this profile for the first time, it says Not Started. If I go in and I get called away for a parent that came to visit or a fire drill goes off and I come back, it will have a date that changes were made, and this button will change to In Progress. So that just lets you know, like, this student, I haven't touched their profile at all. This student's in the middle of taking the assessment. So when you click on Not Started, it'll populate. The first thing you have to put in is the responses from the parent questionnaire at entry. If the parent refused to answer, you can mark parent refusal. If they did not, then you just simply click no, and that's the end of this question. If they did participate, you click yes, and it populates the same responses that were on that parent questionnaire in the test administration manual. You'll have to make a selection or input data for each question. So the option to skip question number 4 and move on to question number 5, it's not a choice. It won't let you submit the profile for the student if every single question is not answered. So we're going to say they went, wow, apparently I need typing lessons today. The neighborhood house is where they attended preschool. So I type that in, And then they went for 12 months. They went 4 to 5 days a week, and it was a half-day program. The question came up about Upstart or the Waterford program. And what if children went to multiple programs? So say they did Upstart at home and they attended a preschool at the Davis School District. I would fill out the information of the program that they attended for the longest duration, either in length or times per week or hours per session. So say they did Upstart 2 days a week, 20 minutes a day, and they went to preschool in Davis 4 days a week for 2 hours a day. I would pick to submit the information for the one that was of the longest duration, which in this case would be the Davis preschool attendance. So that's it for the parent questionnaire. Then it moves on to each question. So question number 1 is the vocabulary question, and you're just going to mark whether they got it correct or incorrect. They pointed to the book on the shelf, but they did not point to the ball under the table. So they would score that answer as incorrect. Eventually, on the production website, you'll see a total number of points down here under the box that will show you for question number 1, they received 4 out of 4 points. And this should correlate with the scores that you see on the paper sheet if you decided to total. If you didn't, great, the Data Gateway will total it correctly for you. You won't be able to go in and change the total number of points that the child earned. It's all calculated based on the responses that you select for each question. Okay, same thing for directionality. They got where I should begin, correct, and they missed which way should I go next. Very straightforward. They pointed to a number, they pointed to a letter. This one, it gives you the option to either mark all of the responses correct or all of the responses wrong. And you can see on the left-hand side that it just changed all of the responses to incorrect. So say you have a student that only got 3 or 4 letter names right. I would probably pick the all wrong option, and then I would come over here and say they got the letter A, they got the letter X, and they got the letter Z. And then that way, it reflects the 3 correct answers that they provided with much less clicking than marking all 23 other letters incorrect. It also gives you the option over here with these tiny little check boxes to strike through one whole row at a time. So say they missed the first one, they missed the second one, but then they got all of the third row correct, and then they missed the last 2 rows. So you can mark out 1 row at a time, and you're like, oh no, they self-corrected here and got the letter V right. So you can change your responses as you go along. Hopefully that's clear and that makes sense for you all. So this question number 5, again, either the answer is correct or incorrect. When you see the responses on the right-hand side for all correct or all wrong, that means that the information on the left side of the page is clickable. So you can say they missed sun, they got cup, they missed door, and they missed shoe. So you can mark through just like you were scoring on a paper score sheet, which ones the students got wrong for that question. Same thing, question number 7, just like the letter naming, all correct or all wrong, it will mark the responses for you, depending on which one you pick. This one, you'll probably need to look in your test administration manual to make sure that you are giving students the correct points based on the answers that they provided for the oral language question. 5 points if they gave an answer choice or an answer response that had 5 or more words in one complete sentence, and then 1 point for content if it was on topic. Okay. And then these are the shapes that the child will point to. If they pointed to the circle, you would mark it correct. If they pointed to the square, and if they missed the triangle, you would just simply mark it incorrect. Now this one, rote counting, question number 10, you have to listen to the child count and mark what number they missed. So say the child counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They missed the number 5, so you would mark that wrong. Now, say I'm listening to another student count, and they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10. And I accidentally mark the number 6 wrong. But they did count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they would actually miss the number 7. So if I mark the number 6 wrong by mistake, I have to click the number after that to remove the mark from number 6. So, and that applies to anything. Say they counted to 9, correct? I have to mark the number after 9 so that 9 is counted correct. That's the only kind of little quirky part about the selection of answer choices for question number 10. But other than that, all correct, all wrong, mark through the ones that they missed. Question number 11 is the same option. You can mark the ones they got wrong. All correct, all wrong. It will total the points for you eventually down here underneath. Question number 12. You're going to score these separately. The 3 objects for counting and cardinality. So they were able to count with one-to-one correspondence correctly, and they were able to tell me they counted 3 objects. They were able to count 5 objects with one-to-one correspondence with errors in counting, and when I asked how many, they had to recount, so they would not receive credit for that one. So this is broken down into 2 separate sections for scoring, and you'll notice that the materials in the book look different than the materials that are in the data gateway. The materials in the book say counters are manipulatives, all the same colors. The ones that are on the data gateway are not all the same colors. So I'm not sure how the materials in the manual ended up being all the same color, but in the instructions, there are not the requirements for that set of manipulatives to be all the same color. So if you use manipulatives that are different colors, that's acceptable for question number 12. When it comes to question number 13, you have to follow the prescription for the number and color of manipulatives for that item. Okay, hopefully that's clear. This one, yes, they could sort correctly for question 13. No, they could not duplicate, but yes, they could extend. So you just simply mark how the student responded, correct or incorrect, and then move on to the next question. Last question here is question number 14. This is the quantity discrimination. They point to the number 3. That one has more. They pointed to the number 1. That one does not have more. They pointed to 4, and then they pointed to 3. So they would have gotten 2 out of the 4 correct. So that is it for the literacy and numeracy questions. Hopefully it makes sense. It really is very intuitive. It's very straightforward. If you as a classroom teacher have any questions about how to score items, I'm happy to help answer them. Other than that, we just have the lifelong learning practices questions to go. And these correlate to the observational inventory that is either on page 39 in your test administration manual, or you can find it on page 47. It is grouped by question, the same questions that are in the manual, opportunities to respond, sustained effort, attention and focus, and you'll just click the answer that best fits for each student as you observed during the assessment. And the data gateway will calculate the points for you and populate all that information on the main roster page. So down here at the bottom, there is this lovely little button that says submit. If you are finished with all of the questions on the assessment and you're confident that the responses you recorded are accurate and correct, you can click the submit button. However, since this is just a development website, I click the submit button and I break things. So I'm not going to click submit. I'm just going to go back to the main roster page instead. And again, like I said earlier, I've accessed that profile. I've hit save or submit. It will come up with the information here depending on what I did. If I hit submit, it will tell you that the date it was submitted. And instead of it saying not started or in progress, it will have a little lock symbol and it will say view. So you're still able to go in and view the profile of all students. You won't be able to make changes if it has the lock symbol next to it, but you can still access and see how they responded, what questions they missed, anything. You're just not capable of making changes. So that, in a nutshell, is the data entry piece. Now let's just take a really quick look right here at the alt entry. And I know Tracy's sitting over there. She might panic when I pull this up because I don't know that it's actually correct and accurate. They're still working downstairs and all the changes they've made have not quite made it to the site yet. But this is something like what the alt entry will look like. So you have your standards, and then you have the not yet emerging, approaching target that you'll be able to select from. So it's broken down.
Yes. So just to clarify, so they're still working downstairs.
Yes.
So this is actually the data entry piece from the kindergarten alternate, but it will be similar, right? The PEEP will. So it'll just have that content area, right? Like in our first one, it was vocabulary, and then it said align to question number 1. And then it would give you the standard, and then you'll just have the not emerging, approaching target, and at target. We don't have advanced in PEEP. So it'll look kind of similar to that, but not exactly. But it gives you an idea of what comes through.
And then it's broken down again by literacy, by numeracy, and then down here, the lifelong learning practices. So click the submit button. You won't be able to make any changes. Now you'll notice here that the same students show up on the alt entry roster page as they did on the regular PEEP entry roster page. So you have to make sure that you are in the correct assessment that you are trying to score in the data gateway. It will automatically default during the assessment window to entry. So if you need to input information for alt entry, make sure you select the alt entry drop down under your assessment type. Excuse me. Since this is the operational field test year, there will not be immediate reports available for teachers. We have to go through the standard setting process, determine what information we can share, what to include on the report before we are able to generate those for you. But moving forward,
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Really quick.
Moving forward in the future, we hope to have those reports available instantly. When you have clicked the submit button and you see the lock, you should be able to download a student report as well.
Okay, so we have 2 questions, one from Emily. says, when we are training others on the scoring, will there be a test case like no way, Jose, we can use to demonstrate?
There, unfortunately, will not be because of the production data gateway site, the live site that you're going to enter. All students have to go through an SSID authentication process in order to be rostered, and I don't know of a workaround for that. I am happy to record kind of like a screencast of just the data entry piece on this development site for you if you think that would be something that could be helpful. Okay.
Okay, and then our second question from Wendy says, if you use the computer entry and it tallies the scores, let's see here, sorry. I'm trying to scroll to see the whole question. So if you use the computer entry and it tallies the scores for you, does it alter the end scores if you mark all correct or all wrong?
So it will record, I think what you're asking here is if you select all correct or all wrong, and then come over here and mark answers out, the last selection you made will be reflected in the score that is recorded. So I started out at all correct for 26 points, and then they missed 3, so I marked those 3 wrong. It will calculate that as 23 points. So the last selection I made would be the final score that is recorded. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions? Let me see if I can get.
It would be helpful to have the screencast of the development site.
Okay, perfect. So I will make a screencast for you of just the development site so that you are able to kind of walk through the test case with the students or with your teachers that you're training for data entry. I know it's not super helpful that you don't have access to that type of thing, but it's just a production case. So, great. Any other questions? And I know we had the question about the neighborhood house. I don't know if you saw when we were in the actual PEEP Data Gateway that the neighborhood house is listed as its own LEA. So
it's not to register.
Yeah, it's just not on the main data gateway. So I would not put your LEA as Salt Lake City. Okay, and I will get back to you with an answer on that. ABC Great Beginning seems like they're in the same boat, so I will give you answers from IT as soon as I get them. All right, so the only thing that we have left to discuss inside this development data gateway, there was a question here about how our students entered into the roster. That is a fantastic question. So if I click here up at the top on the banner, it takes me back to the main homepage where I have the ability to roster both classrooms and students. So this is a really important piece of the whole process. Since we are including both public providers and private providers in the data gateway, not everyone has access to a student information system or an SIS to roster students automatically. So for the PEEP, all student rostering is going to have to be manual. So the first thing as an LEA person, your LEA admin, if you're in a district, or your private providers will have someone who typically oversees the program. You have to add classrooms to your school. So I'm in Alpine District at Alpine School, and I already have a class for Liz. Now I need a class for Whitney's awesome friends. Oh, too long. Whitney's class. I guess we'll just have to be boring because her name is too long. So it will populate a list of teachers based on the information that is populated from Utrecht. So right here, Whitney is not available teacher for here. I can create a class under Heather. So it says here that the classroom is added successfully. Now that I've added a classroom, I can go back and I can add a student. So again, depending on your user role, these information pieces over here for district and school will all automatically be populated for you. So I have an SSID for the preschool student that I want to roster. That is the first step in the process. Now, if you are at a private provider, you will have to coordinate with Jonathan Collins here at USBE to get SSID numbers for all of the students in your program. I have a document that I will share with Jessica, and she can get it out to all of the private providers of the process that outlines how to assign SSIDs. That's the first step in the process. You get the SSID assigned, and this page is going to look slightly different when it's actually in the production environment. I do believe that the only piece of information you're going to have to input is the SSID number. So you'll input the SSID number. We're gonna have another, no way, Jose. I don't think that you'll have to input all this information. They just, again, made changes to it and haven't updated my development site yet. So you'll see here that it tells me that I just added a new student successfully. So I'm going to go back to administer, select the assessment I want to administer. My school for you will already be populated. And now there's a student that's rostered for Whitney's class. Now, the only people, again, who have the ability to roster are those with LEA admin access. So if you are a PEEP LEA admin, you will be able to roster students. Teachers will not be able to roster students. Okay, so it's important to note, if you are a teacher and you log into the data gateway today, I can tell you that you won't see the option for PEEP because it's not quite there yet. We have to give the district time to go through the whole manual rostering piece, and then we can allow the teachers to get in and enter the data. That's why I said my general recommendation would be to score pencil paper so that you aren't waiting for the data gateway to be up and running. Okay. I saw there was one question.
So
About
one from Rochelle says, so is the expectation that we enter all students or just those that will be going to kindergarten that we will be administering the PEEP to?
the PEEP is only administered to students who turn 4 before September 2nd of this school year. So it would be those preschoolers that are going to kindergarten next year. Please do not administer the PEEP to all of the preschoolers that you're building, especially if you have those that are in a 3-year-old preschool as well. It's only designed to be administered to 4-year-old preschool students. And you would enter the information into the data gateway if you are a grant participant. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question,
And then
Rochelle.
another one. Tell him I'll put Jonathan's, Sid already put Jonathan's contact in there.
Oh, perfect.
So then the next question from Shelley is, So LEA admin will have to manually enter each SSID to correspond with the correct teacher.
Yes, each LEA admin will have to manually enter each SSID to roster the student with the correct teacher. I know some of you are from a district that have an SIS system, but you're not able to automatically roster students. That's not how the interface was set up for this school year. We're hopeful that moving forward, we can make changes and have the ability to both automatically roster and manually roster students. But for right now, you have to manually enter the SSID numbers.
And then a follow-up question, do we not get SSID numbers from Kristen Campbell anymore?
So we have a new person on our early childhood team here at USBE. His name is Jonathan Collins, and he's stepping in to help take over some of the duties that Kristen Campbell used to do. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to Kristen, but Jonathan has assumed some of those duties of Kristen. So I want to provide some clarification about what information you send back and forth to John. I have a document that outlines the process that I can share with the LEA admins. You'll reach out to Jonathan Collins and let him know that you need some SSIDs for students at your program. He will then send you a link to a file sharing source that is called Move It. Once you receive the link from Jonathan, you'll be able to upload that PII via Move It. We don't want to send secure, personally identifiable information over email. So wait to get the link for Move It from Jonathan. Provide that file to Jonathan via Move It, and he will send you a file back that has the SSIDs for the students at your private providers. So Jonathan will be providing the SSIDs. It's no longer Kristen Campbell's task as it relates to the preschool grant funding. Please do not send him PII over email. Just reach out and let him know you have information to share and you need a Move It link. There is a question here about when will we be able to begin entering SSIDs. So the data gateway will be up and running by the close of business on August 8th. So first thing, August 9th, school districts will be able to enter students into rosters. Okay. Sorry, Rochelle, I just now saw your other question about we only enter those students on the data gateway roster for the classroom.
With a follow-up.
I'm not sure that I understand fully the remainder of your question, Rochelle. So if you're there still and can provide a little bit more clarifying information, I'll be happy to answer. But I'm not sure I understand what you're asking right now. Yes, and Sid provided clarification that you only have to roster those 4-year-old students that are at the school, not all of the students at the school, just the 4-year-old students in programs that are participating in the grant funding. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can do this without tech help. I'm going to navigate away from this data gateway page, and I'm going to
Click stop sharing.
Stop share.
And then the upload button,
The
the
share.
black one.
Oh, the upload.
From Curtis.
It's fine. Maybe. Okay. So there's just a few more things that we're going to talk about, and then we'll be finished for the day. So again, access to the data gateway at schools, datagateway.schools.utah.gov. Make sure you register a login. If you are participating in the grant funding, you have 4 weeks before the first day of preschool to 4 weeks after to administer the PEEP, and until September 30th to enter your data into the data gateway. Like I said, the PEEP will be available for your schools or your districts, private schools, public LEAs, public providers, to begin rostering students on August 9th. Teachers will be able to access the data gateway to enter your assessment data starting August 15th. We want to make sure that we give districts adequate time to be able to roster their students, especially if you're from a larger district, you have quite a few students. We want to make sure there's adequate time. So please don't try to go in before August 15th to enter your data into the data gateway. And there are a couple more questions. Only the children with SSIDs are able to be rostered. If you do not have an SSID for a child, you will not be able to roster them. That is how they're going to be rostered. The SSIDs are assigned to a preschool. You type in the SSID. It goes through an authentication process that says, yes, that SSID is associated with this school, and it will allow you to roster the children. If they don't have an SSID, there's no way that you can roster them in the data gateway currently. I hope that helps, Kristen. And Shella, yes, I will make a separate screencast for those LEA admins on how to enter classrooms and students into rosters on the video. I kind of breezed through it because I thought the development site looked different than it did, and as it turns out, it wasn't what I was expecting. And rather than confusing you, I just kind of shuffled through it really fast. But I will make a separate webinar or screencast for you, not a webinar, a recording that shows how to enter classrooms and students onto rosters in the data gateway. Yep, you're welcome. And shouldn't all students have an SSID? If you are participating in grant funding, then all of your preschool students must have an SSID. Public LEAs, like your larger school districts or your charter schools, have the ability to generate their own SSIDs, so they do not have to reach out to Jonathan Collins for help. If you are at a private provider, then you reach out to Jonathan and say, I need to share some information to get some SSIDs for you.
Can I just offer a quick clarification real quick? This is Jessica Smith, preschool specialist. So just as we've been testing these programs, a misconception has been that only the students that are being funded in private care settings need to be assessed and have an SSID. We really want that to be a larger sample size. So any student that's attending that high quality program, regardless of funding source, whether parents are paying for them or the grant is paying for their seat, should be assigned an SSID and assessed so that we can have a larger sample size and have a more accurate evaluation of the programs.
Those 4-year-old students
Yes.
that are attending. Just those 4-year-old students. Okay, back to a couple of questions here. I'm trying to keep up with the chat box. Will you include scoring the test on the screencast? Yes, I sure can. Are we able to use the assessment for parent-teacher conferences? I would say that you should be sharing information with parents anytime you administer some sort of assessment, but I would explain to them the purpose behind the assessment, what it's looking at, and then how their student performed. This first year, it's going to be a little bit more complicated because all you have is the questions and how they were answered. There isn't any other reporting information to go along with it. So I would be careful the context in which you share this information with parents in. Hopefully that makes sense. And then will we be administering at the end of you will be administering the PEEP exit at the end of the school year. It's different from the PEEP entry, but there is a PEEP exit that will be administered at the end of the school year. And I do believe that additional training will be provided on that closer to the end of the school year. If we are not participating in the grant this year, can we still get copies of the materials? So we have printed materials available for grant participants to come to the office and pick up. Either come here or pick them up at the grant meetings next week. Is it next week or the week next? The 15th and 16th of August, there are grant meetings for Becoming Quality and Expansion grants. If you are participating in the programs, we will have printed materials for you. If you are not, the materials are available on the Utah State Board of Education website under the assessment section. If you click on the pre-kindergarten tab, you can see all of the materials for entry and all of the materials for exit. We don't have enough materials to share with all of the preschools out there. We just ordered enough to share with the grant participants for this year. But you are more than welcome to download and print as many copies as you need from the internet.
And those alternate materials should be available on the
Yes.
website soon.
The PEEP alternate materials should also be available on that same website really soon. A letter explaining that we can use. I'm assuming, Lola, that this is referring to, are you able to share with parents?
Yeah, will you be drafting a letter that we can send to parents to explain the test?
No, USBE will not be drafting a letter to send to parents explaining the PEEP assessment. That's something that is the responsibility of the LEAs. So I can't provide a form letter for you, but you're more than happy to come up with one on your own. Can Jonathan send a public LEA a list of the SSIDs for the students that we need to enter so that I have them all along the report?
I don't believe we have a way to pull that. I think you guys need to go in your own system and look at that age requirement and then make a list of those students. Because as I know for David specifically, that as you guys register them, you're creating those SSIDs. So you would just need to go through your class list and identify those students that meet that age requirement for the PEEP entry and enter those assessments. I will also quickly just mention that last year we gave the PEEP entry as an exit assessment in some preschool programs. At this time, because the PEEP is developed, there should be no PEEP assessment materials in any preschool classroom, especially for those private providers. I know you had that in your classroom, so just make sure that your teachers and assessors are not using PEEP, but they're now using the PEEP entry materials.
But yes, Shelley, to your comment here in the chat box, the PEEP exit is based off of the PEEP entry. There were some slight modifications made to portions of the PEEP exit. So just make sure that you do, in fact, when it gets to the PEEP exit time, have the correct PEEP materials in your preschool classrooms. But yes, you're right to align your CBA with the PEEP because the PEEP exit will be the same mostly as the PEEP entry was. Yes, Wendy Harris has a question to clarify that all student scores are to be entered into the data gateway, whether or not they are funded through the grant. Correct. If your location is receiving funding either from Becoming Quality or Expansion, please make sure that you input student scores for all students in the data gateway so that we can have a larger sample size of data for the standard setting process this year. Okay? All right, just a few more slides. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Again, districts can begin rostering August 9th. Teachers can begin entering data August 15th. I will post some webinars on how to create classrooms, how to roster students, and then also one on how to enter scores into the data gateway. We just talked about the standard setting process. now and also in the item discussion. It will occur in the fall of 2019 after the testing window has closed. And as a result of standard setting, you might see some changes come out for the next school year's administration. Okay, if you have any issues or questions, the first person that you should reach out to as a contact would be your district assessment director, or more specifically, if you have a preschool program director, you can reach out to them. If you're at a private provider, then it would be the person that is responsible for the implementation of the grant funding. So they're going to be the ones that have the ability to help answer any question that you have. Now, if they're not able to, they're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I will be happy to provide assistance. In the manual, in Appendix A, there are some accommodations that apply to the entire PEEP entry and exit profile. These are the allowable accommodations for students with disabilities. You can read through the list. It starts on page 41, and it talks about large print paper, magnification, if you can provide sign language, or assistive communication devices. Any of those typical accommodations that you would find in a 504 IEP plan are outlined here. Tracy Gooley does have Braille materials available if you need any Braille assessment materials. Her contact information is right here on the page, and she's more than happy to provide materials. Okay, there's a question in the chat. If we get a student halfway through the year, do we still need to do the entry and or exit? Okay. The assessment window, 4 weeks before the first day to 4 weeks after the first day. Any student who is there during that 8-week window has to be administered the entry. Likewise, if they're there during the 4-week time period at exit, they have to be administered the exit. If you didn't administer the entry, you can still administer the exit. Say you get a student in January, the entry wouldn't be as applicable, and the exit, it's a little too early, so I wouldn't do anything until you're within that testing window, right? If you get a student October 3rd and you want to see how they might have performed, you're more than welcome to administer the entry. You're just not going to record the data in the data gateway. The grant that we're referring to here is the Becoming Quality Preschool Grant or the Expansion Preschool Grant.
Yeah. So these are the high quality Becoming Quality grants, or the high quality school readiness expansion grant that previously existed. These were renewed and amended this last legislative session and SB 166. So if you've heard of HQSR or HQSRE, the new terms are Becoming Quality for HQSR and Expansion for HQSRE. So those applications and that whole process has already been completed, so you should have been notified if you're an awardee. And as part of being an awardee, you are required to administer the school readiness assessment or the PEEP entry and exit.
Okay, so hopefully I've caught up. I do have one private message that I'm gonna get an answer to for you in just a second. But any questions about the accommodations piece? Again, Tracy Gooley is a great resource. She is happy to answer any questions for you if they should come up. We did talk about very briefly at the beginning oral translation accommodations. The only thing that is allowed to be accommodated is the direction. And the directions in the case of the PEEP refers to the non-item content that is at the very beginning of the test. So it's the, hi, my name is Liz. What is your name? That's the only question for right now that can be translated into the student's native language. Okay, it doesn't refer to non-item content, or I'm sorry, it refers to the non-item content at the beginning. It does not refer to the item stems, directions for answering a specific question, or anything else once you get to the literacy and numeracy practice or assessment questions in the PEEP. Okay? Just prior to this PEEP meeting, Tracy Gooley talked a lot about the alternate assessment for the PEEP. It is for those students with significant cognitive disabilities that are unable to access the regular PEEP. If you have any questions about the alternate, this video link will be posted and it will include the alt PEEP information that Tracy shared. You can watch the video, or you're more than welcome to reach out to Tracy with any questions. Again, the USB website will have the PEEP entry, the PEEP exit, and the alt PEEP information available with the link to this training video. I think there is, yes, we will attempt to share this PowerPoint with you as well, either the link through Midas or if I can post it on the website, I'm not sure. I have to check, but we will do our best to make this available. If you happen to not hear or see it, either on the website or via an email link from Midas, feel free to reach out to me and I will happily share it with you. All right, so this is the end of the PEEP presentation. Here is some contact information for you. Up here in the assessment department, you have myself, Liz Williams, Whitney Barlow, and Cindy Carter. And then downstairs at Teaching and Learning in the preschool area, it's Jessica Smith and Jamie Robinson. And then accommodations or alternate assessments, your contact would be Tracy Gooley. Again, any of us are happy to answer questions for you. If you need them, feel free to reach out anytime via email. The Utah State Board of Education website is a great resource for all of the testing materials that you need. And again, those materials we do have printed for those participants of the grant. Just reach out either to myself or Jessica and we can coordinate. If you're not going to be up in the Salt Lake area anytime soon, we're happy to try our best to help get you your materials. So I'll stick around for just another minute or two. If there's any outstanding questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. If not, thank you for participating today. And again, reach out if there's any questions that you have. And I will work on the links to those web recordings for the data entry piece and rostering of students. Thank you. You guys have a good day.